I have fought very firmly against white domination. I have fought very firmly against black domination. I cherish the ideal of a new South Africa where all South Africans are equal.
Nelson Mandela has died aged 95. He was pivotal to ending apartheid in South Africa and was the most admired leader of the last 40 years in the world. Here with me is Alec Russell, former South Africa bureau chief for the Financial Times, who knew Mr. Mandela intimately. Alec, what was he like?
Well, Mandela, as a lot of people have been saying today, was of course many things. He could at times come across as an old-fashioned autocrat. He could at times come across as a sort of revolutionary leader or great statesman. But those of us that covered him closely in the 90s when he was president concluded that what he really was the great seducer. He was absolutely brilliant at seducing whoever he met. Correspondents, we were putty in his hand. He would call us to impromptu gatherings in his house, and we'd sit under a tree in his garden in the sort of under the bright high-felt sun, and he'd give homilies to us. And now we were meant to be critical journalists, and we'd just be sort of looking up at him, I have to say, in utter awe. But more important than the reaction of the seduced correspondents, of course, was he seduced the Afrikaner.
F.W. de Klerk, the president, the man who helped engineer the end of apartheid in South Africa, almost a Gorbachev in his own country.
Very much so, although I think you could say that FW was more successful than Gorbachev, because Gorbachev didn't know how far to reform, whereas de Klerk kept going. He realized that once you'd embarked on reform, you had to keep going. But de Klerk and Mandela, funny enough, had a slightly prickly relationship. And de Klerk was never as seduced as most of his fellow Afrikaners were. But I mean, in the mid-90s, you could go to small right-wing Afrikaner towns and they would just be rapturous about Mandela. He'd embraced their sport, rugby. He was their leader.
He also had a great moral authority. Where did that come from?
Well, I guess primarily it came from 27 years in prison. That's a sort of extraordinary cross to have borne. But he came out from prison, an experience which surely would have embittered just about anyone else. He came out from prison preaching reconciliation.
Not rancor.
Not rancor. I remember discussing this with someone who spent 25 years in prison with him. And this man is now long since dead, one of the ANC greats. And he said Mandela sat him down after about 5 years and said, no, we've got it all wrong. We have to learn how to work with the Afrikaner. It's not going to work for South Africa if we come out angry, because we will come out, he said, and we have to come out able to work with the Afrikaner.
Many people find it so hard to transfer from, if you like, the bush, armed opposition into government. What was Mandela like in government as leader of the country?
He made mistakes. He wasn't, he wasn't blemish-free. He had a slight susceptibility to the sort of glamour of celebrities, and he was over-tolerant of non-performers in his cabinet, over-loyal, I suppose. But
did he fix his succession?
Well, actually,
did he get that right?
Well, it's a good question. He didn't fix his succession, which is a great testament to him, because he wanted Cyril Ramaphosa, the great union leader, to succeed him, and the party wanted Thabo Mbeki, who was a great internal ANC leader, to succeed him, and the party won.
Of course, there was so much hope when apartheid ended, and as you say, it ended without violence. But now, 20 years on, what is Mandela's legacy, and how do you see South Africa performing as an economy and as a functioning society?
I do think we should remember that the hopes in '94 were impossibly high. You can't transform a country with such entrenched inequalities just with the wave of Mandela's wand. And I think it's worth considering that in the days ahead, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of oh why have all the hopes been abandoned. It's not quite like that.
And finally, Nelson Mandela's epitaph, what will it be?
Well, I would argue that he presides over the pantheon of the great leaders of the 20th century. People refer to him as Gandhi, but he wasn't Gandhi, and he hated. I remember asking him about Gandhi, and he hated being compared. Well, probably didn't hate being compared to Gandhi, but he didn't think it was an appropriate comparison, because he said, you know, he adopted the armed struggle. Gandhi famously believed in peace, but unlike Gandhi, Mandela had to wrestle with the realities of power and politics. So I would say unquestionably that he is the great leader of the last century.